Hi everyone, Dave PROWSE here. Today I'm installing a Samsung 960 Pro SSD. This is an M.2 architecture. We're going to put this into our AV editor computer in the slot right here. And for those of you that have not been following along with me, this is my main system for video editing and rendering. It's a Core i7 with 16 gig of DDR4 RAM and an Asus X99 motherboard, just so you have a point of reference here. And I want to use this drive, hopefully, as the main video editing and rendering drive. Samsung says that it can do about 3,500 megabytes per second. We'll check that once we install it. And you might notice here, I already have an Intel 750 series drive. And it's actually a similar drive. It's bigger. This actually goes into a PCI Express slot, and this performs very well when it shows up. It has been temperamental on more than one occasion, and this last occasion has prompted me to try to go for something more reliable and possibly faster. We'll see. Once this is installed, we'll test the speed of this against this and against the operating system drive, which is just a Samsung 850 SATA 3.0 solid state drive. So this is M.2, and so you might have heard of M.2 and also mini SATA connections. And so this is kind of the next version of the mini SATA connection, the M.2. And it's been around for several years in PCs and laptops, and it allows for connectivity via USB 3, or faster with SATA 3, or better yet, NVMe connections with PCI Express. NVMe is non-volatile memory express, and it normally utilizes the PCI Express bus. That's the fastest. As long as you have version 3 on your system, that's going to be the fastest, and that's going to be the way to go. So that's what you want for these drives, if at all possible. This is a 512 gig, and so that's, right now, for me, that's the best price point, the 512 gig. So, and that's plenty big for my projects that I work on at any given time. So that's something to watch for, and make sure that you can fit this into your slot on your motherboard. Now, there's different sizes as well. This particular one is a 2280, which is fairly common. And I've already checked this motherboard's M.2 slot supports 2280. So you want to make sure that before you install. Okay, this is the 960 Pro. They also make an Evo version. And if you're wondering, I believe the Pro writes less bits per write cycle. And so it might be 2 bits as opposed to 3 or 4 bits for the Evo. And what this translates to is that it can potentially do faster transfers of bigger data and bigger renderings. We'll see. We'll see how that goes. You'll notice a big sticker on the top here. That'll void the warranty if you remove it, so you want to leave that on. You might say, well, what about heat transfer? And I'm concerned about that also. So we will be checking the heat transfer once we install it. Samsung has said that this is copper lined to help with heat dissipation. So we'll see if that's the case. I'm not too worried about the heat issue here because I have a lot of space. There's a lot of space for airflow, and I could always add a fan or another cooling solution. Not too worried about that here, but if you were to install this to a laptop, it's definitely going to be a concern because these can run hot. And with these types of drives, once you get to, say, 55, 60 degrees Celsius, they can throttle down, and their data transfer can go from 35 or 3,000 megabytes per second down to 1,000 megabytes per second or something like that. So that is definitely a concern with laptops because of the enclosed space, the tight space, and also especially if you're taxing your CPU and your RAM and your GPU, creating additional heat, which is all just going to flow past this guy. So we want to be careful with the heat. We're going to check that as well as the data transfer. And so let's get on with the install. Install this is pretty simple. It goes in on a slight angle into the slot, and then you space it and screw it down, and there's a screw here. The tools you're going to want include the trusty #1 Phillips head screwdriver. You're probably going to want some needle nose pliers and a 3-prong parts grabber just in case you drop a screw. And of course, have your ESD prevention methods in place. I got tons of those going on before you start working on this guy. Okay, and so we'll get to work on this now. Now, first thing I want to do is I want to remove this PCI Express card because it's in the way. So we'll take that guy out, place him in the trash. No, just kidding. I'm going to put him in an anti-static area. Okay, that gives us some space to work here. Now we'll have to remove the screw that's there. Okay, and if you drop it, just use the 3-prong parts grabber. And if you look at that screw carefully, you'll see it's a screw screwed into a spacer, which then screws into the motherboard. So we need to detach the screw, and that's where those needle nose pliers will come in handy. Okay, so we've zoomed in here a little bit, and you see this is where I took the screw out of. And the M.2 connector, the M.2 card can have different sizes. So they give you different screw holes for this, depending on what size you have. We have this size here. So we'll screw that in. You might not be able to see it, but I just screwed in the spacer there. Then we could put the card in. Okay, hold that card by the edge. We'll put it in at a slight angle. Find the right angle and just push in slightly. There we go. Once you find that angle, it should just kind of hang there. Then you can push it in a little bit further to make sure it's got a solid connection. We'll press that down and we'll start the screw in. Okay, and don't over tighten. Just tighten it enough so that it stays in place. Don't want to over tighten because it will be generating heat, and that will cause contraction and expansion. And so you want to be careful with that. Don't tighten too much, and make sure that we have inserted all the way, of course, before you do screw that in. And we look good now with this guy. I'm going to put the other drive back in. Okay, and I'm checking this also. The drive is not touching the other one. That meaning the Intel drive is not pressing against the Samsung drive at all. We want to make sure about that. So we're looking good, and that's the physical install. That's basically it. And so now we're going to boot up the system and take a look at what we have and do some testing and see what we see. Okay, so we closed up the computer, booted it up, and it didn't see anything. In fact, the Intel 750 was gone as well, so that was fun. Just a little troubleshooting to do with that, and basically all we had to do was pull the Intel 750, and then I reset the BIOS to the optimal defaults, just to the defaults, restarted, and it saw the Samsung, the M.2 drive, and then it showed up, the storage controller showed up, but it showed up as a Microsoft drive, a Microsoft controller, or a Microsoft NVMe controller. So I already went and downloaded the driver from Samsung, got the NVMe driver. I also downloaded the Magician software and the installation guide. And the installation guide is interesting. Lots of interesting information on there. You can install these as PCI Express cards or as the M.2 like I just did. And you get lots of different information here about that. And a couple things you have to watch for. First of all, on my motherboard, if you install the M.2, your last PCI Express slot will then be disabled automatically. Now, the Intel 750 was not in that slot. That was in the, I believe, the third of the PCI by 16 slots. And so that was just another fun issue with that drive, with that motherboard. But anyways, you want to make sure that you aren't using anything in that last slot. In addition, you want to make sure that you're not using any RAID when you're installing the driver. If RAID is running, the Windows might not see the drive at all. And then you want to make sure that other settings like NAND are set properly. And if you want to boot to a drive like this, you may have to do some additional configurations in the BIOS or the UEFI. So you got to keep that in mind. So I've already downloaded that, and it was a basic installation, and then it changed over to Samsung NVMe controller. And the disk drive is here. It sees the drive, SSD 960. And after I did that, I shut it down and plugged the Intel 750 back in. And here's the driver for that controller. And here's that actual drive. So we've got all the drives here. This one's where the operating system lives. And that's just a 250 gig SATA 3.0 drive. And here's the Intel 750, and here's the Samsung 960. Okay, so it sees the drive, but we still have to initialize the drive. And to do that, we need to go to Disk Management. And you'll see here's the operating system drive with a C volume and an E volume. Then we have, this is G, where my media is, and video files. That's the Intel 750. And here's the new one. That's the Samsung. So we have to right-click on that, Initialize Disk. And normally I'm going to be doing this as GPT. So we'll do that. And we're actually going to make this one drive letter, one volume. So we'll right-click on that, New Simple Volume, and just use the entire amount. And I'll call this guy H. And we'll call this Media 2. And finish. And there we go. NTFS Media 2 is online. And we see here, 100% free, and it's healthy. Let's bring up the File Explorer. And indeed, we see, here's our C drive. Here's our Intel 750. Here is our Samsung 960. So we're in good shape with that. All right, so here's all three drives in Device Manager. And first, the operating system drive. I tested this already. This I tested with Crystal Disk Mark, and if you look now, you'll see that it did about 548 megabytes reading and 532 writing. Not too bad for an SATA 3.0 drive. But then if we look at the Intel 750, we'll see a huge increase from that because, again, this is NVMe. It's PCI Express version 3. And you see that this was a read of 2372 megabytes per second and a write of 1047 megabytes per second. And both of these are idle, by the way. And so now that I have the new disk initialized and formatted, I'd like to do the test for that guy. Okay, so we'll bring up Crystal Disk Mark once again, and we'll pick our H drive this time and start the test. Again, this is idle, so I'll probably do some additional tests and place the info, the results of those, within the article for this video on my website. But we can already see that we're upwards of 3118, 32. Let's see how high it goes, because Samsung said 3,500 megabytes per second max. You almost never get the max, even with a fast system. But there are ways to tweak these drives a bit. Okay, and we'll let this test go until it's finished. And come back in just a minute. Okay, and jumping in here real quick, while this test is still running, I'm running Hardware Monitor also, and watching the temperature of the Samsung drive that I just installed. And with this test, it's getting up to 60 degrees Celsius. And at that point, you can see some throttling down. I'd like to see what happens to the temperature after a minute or so after the test completes. But you'll notice that the Intel drive, that's only at 42 degrees Celsius. It's not doing anything right now, but that's where it's at. And the Samsung drive, you know, that's only at 27 degrees or 28 degrees Celsius. And looks like our test is just about done. There we go. That's completed. And we'll wait for this to refresh real quick here. And it does look like the temperature is going down again, down to about 55, 54 degrees Celsius. We'll keep this running to watch that temperature. Very important. Let's see how hot the GTX 970 is getting. That's probably where a lot of the heat is coming from, to be honest. The CPU temperature, not bad. But that video card can really generate some heat. So I might put another fan in there, maybe at the top of the computer. This is a good program to monitor with, HW monitor, hardware monitor. This is version 1.33. And so we did see the temperature. I was able to get in there on time to see it under a load using Crystal Disk Mark, and did get up to a max of 61 degrees Celsius. So now it's back down to 45. Not too bad with the load. What I want to do now is I want to move a bunch of data. So I'm going to take all the data on the G drive and copy that to the H drive right now. And we're just going to take out the recycle bin and system volume information and that type of thing, and Windows telemetry data, and copy the rest. Okay, and let's take a look at what's happening here. We're going from one NVMe drive to another, and now it's throttled up to about 1.25 gigabytes per second. Interesting, because the one drive, if you saw from before, the Intel 750 can read at 2372 megabytes per second, but can write at 1,000. The other drive, the new one, can apparently write at 2124 megabytes per second. But that number that it's actually copying the data from, even though it's reading from the Intel 750 and writing to the Samsung 960, it's still down around 1.2, 1.1 gigabytes per second, which is closer to the write speed of the 750. So that's interesting stuff. Just doing this in real time and trying to check this temperature too. You can see here the temperature is at 53. Not too bad. It's copying a lot of data, so that's not too bad. I'm going to check that with video rendering and with a couple games I have on there also. You might have seen some of those files passing through, and it'll probably drop now again. So we're looking good. I copied the data pretty fast. That was, how much data was that? I wasn't watching. That was 77 gigs just while I'm yapping for a little bit. So not bad. But again, if you look at the comparison data-wise, it does look like the 960 is faster. It's faster on the read side, and it's faster definitely by 100% on the write side. It's just that it does run a little bit hotter, so that's something that we'll need to work with. At this point, we're at 42 degrees Celsius on the Intel, 48 degrees Celsius on the 960. So it seems to run hotter as it's doing things in comparison. And I mean, that makes sense because this has a giant heat sink and this doesn't. But I'm impressed so far with tweaking it. I think we might be able to get this higher. Tweaking the system, we might be able to get this higher to the 3,500 megabyte per second maximum that Samsung states. Okay, so that's that. We copied data to the guy. He works. We've checked them, and all our drives are up and running. And so I'm probably going to use this new Samsung SSD 960 for videos from now on. We'll see how it goes with the first couple of them, and I'll add more information as I go to the article that supports this video on my website. So that's about it for this video. These videos that I do are meant to support my A+ books. If you're interested in the A+, the CompTIA A+, there's my exam cram book and my practice questions book, which supplements it. So if you're interested in the A+, go for those books. Check them out on Amazon or on Pearson. And I just like to do these videos. You know, if you like to watch the videos, that's cool too. Get to see some of the stuff that I'm installing. So that's about it. And I wish you the best with your hard drive adventures. This is Dave PROWSE signing off.